Let me introduce Paul Hagstrom. As I mentioned a few moments ago, he's going to talk about SWEET16, the programming language, not the emulator.
All right. Yes. Well. Yes. Okay. So, greetings. So this is. I signed up for the assembly language lightning talks. I thought SWEET16, this would be a good thing to talk about for 5 minutes. So this is a little bit unstructured, but I want to kind of tell you about what SWEET16 is. Partly the reason I wanted to talk about it or have somebody talk about it was because I didn't know it really very well. This is something that existed on it's within the integer ROM, so it's in the sort of original Apple II, and then by the time you get to the 2 Plus, it effectively goes away. It's possible to load it in and stuff, but so I really didn't have very much experience with it. So I kind of wanted to see what it was, see how it worked, and I'm going to tell you that now. So in May 1977 byte, Steve Wozniak wrote a system description for the Apple II. This is sort of like outlining what this computer can do. There's some nifty animation to highlight things here, but so Steve Wozniak's actual article about this. I don't know if people have read this. It's kind of neat, actually, just to take a look at what was actually in there. But so there's a picture of the colors, and he's sort of walking through all the different things. And so just basically how the system works. And at the end, he mentions the SWEET16 thing. So the Apple II monitor ROM also contains an interpreter program called SWEET16, which can be used for machine language programs to implement 16-bit operations. So because of course we have 8-bit machines, and the idea was essentially that it turned out to be super useful to be able to manipulate 16-bit things for compilers and in his case for making BASIC. And so he basically just created it's essentially a little library of 16-bit routines, but it's implemented as its own little special processor. So this is the story of SWEET16. So when writing Apple BASIC, I ran into the problem of manipulating 16-bit pointer data and its arithmetic in an 8-bit machine. So you basically always had to be doing things that would, be operating with addresses that were 2 bytes long and stuff like that. And it was happening often enough that he thought, I'll offload all of this onto a processor that's basically specialized for this. So it's particularly good at doing things like memory moving. It's kind of designed for that. And so it runs, he says, approximately 10 times slower than the equivalent 6502 code, but is much more compact if what you're trying to do is 16-bit manipulation. Okay, so this is by now we've lost track of what this is, but this is the last page of the system description in the May 1977 byte. And then in the November 77 byte, there's a much more sort of elaborate description of what this is. This is sort of the canonical reference of this. Where is it? Here. SWEET16, the 6502 Dream Machine. So this is Wozniak's article about this. Okay, so here is that article. He sort of introduces it in pretty much the same way that he ended that other article, saying that writing Apple BASIC required a lot of 16-bit manipulation. And so things like compilers, editors, and assemblers are the kinds of things that need to do this regularly enough that it becomes kind of worth it. So he said what he really needed was a 6502 and an RCA 1800 stapled together, and so his solution was to implement a non-existent 16-bit metaprocessor in software, which he calls SWEET16. It's essentially like he created his own alternative microprocessor implemented in the ROM. Okay. So this is a little example of SWEET16 code. So what's happened here? It's embedded. Well, okay, so it's embedded in a larger routine. I think this is probably part of the monitor memory move routine. I didn't actually go look that up. But so what happens is you have 6502 code. So you can kind of read this if you're used to reading that. So you have, your loading the accumulator with something, seeing if it's an M. If it's not, then go over here and see if it's an E and whatever other things you want to check. If it is an M, that sounds like move, so that's probably what this is. It does this JSR SW16, which has a particular location in ROM. Here it's being assembled at 800, but in ROM it's at a particular location. And that basically turns it into SWEET16 mode, and then the opcodes that follow are SWEET16 opcodes. So it's just continuous right in memory, but it just switches into SWEET16 mode, and now we're looking at opcodes basically for a different processor. So we're loading something, we're storing something, we're comparing it to something, and we're branching if it's not 0, or if they're not equal, and then we're returning out of SWEET16 mode into 6502 mode, and then we continue on. So that's sort of what it looks like, and I thought that was kind of interesting because it's a little bit like just we have this embedded code from a different processor. In fact, actually, it reminded me a little bit of what probably happens when you're programming for the Z80. I'll get to that. I don't know much about that either. I learned a lot preparing this for you. I don't know if you'll learn it nearly as much as I did, but okay. Anyway, so that's basically what it looks like. You drop into SWEET16 mode, do your SWEET16 stuff, and then come back out, all basically in the continuous RAM area. Okay, and then, so this is later on in that article. He basically goes through, well, I guess this is what I'm doing. These are the opcodes that we have. So it's reduced instructions. It's really basically just for the kinds of stuff you need to do. One thing that's kind of interesting, okay, so one feature of this is it has 16 registers, rather than just X and Y, right? We have lots of registers. We have, for each of those registers, there's a set of things you can do. You can load, you can store, that kind of stuff. And so the way that this is actually organized is essentially one nibble is the instruction, and the second nibble is the register. So if you want to set register 0, the opcode is 10. If you want to set register 2, the opcode is 12. Right? So the N that's sitting here in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to F, that's these are all register-based commands, and there's a sort of parallel operation for each register. So we can load, we can stave. Set is like load immediate, basically. Load and store are, I think those are, actually I don't know what the difference is. Load indirect is looking at an address and then, like the register holds the address that you're loading from, right? And load double indirect, at first I thought, well, that sounds magical. Is it going to a place that points to a place that we want? But actually it's loading a double byte at an indirect address. So it's load double indirect. That's much less magical. But anyway, it's more useful because it's 16 bits at a time. Okay. Mainly the math you can do is adding and subtracting. You can compare, and then there's a bunch of flags, so for branching purposes. All these things that start with 0 are the non-register commands, right? So anything that starts with anything but a 0, the second digit is going to be the register. Anything that starts with a 0 is a non-register command. You can return, break, branch of carry, no carry, plus, minus, and it has a special branch for looking for -1 as well. So that's kind of, okay, we sort of get the idea. I think I'll probably zoom in on this. Woz pointed out that it's trivial enough that you can hand assemble stuff. Like you can remember this. 2 load, 3 store. Okay. So the way it works is it stores its registers here in the very sort of bottom, top, I don't know which, it's the 0 part of the 0 page, right? It's got 16 registers, which means it needs 32 bytes to do it. So it's this little box here. And then each of the registers is a pair of bytes, right? So the accumulator, register 0, is the first two, 0, 1, and 0, 0, 0, and 0, 1. And then there are a couple of other designated sort of special registers. So we have the program counter is register 15. Status holding the the flags is whatever this is, E14. The result of a compare is register D, and if you use a SWEET16 subroutine, then register C holds, I think, the return address for that. So these are sort of special registers that SWEET16 uses. The rest of them you can use for whatever you want. If you don't mind clobbering things, you can clobber those. Although, I mean, obviously, things like the accumulator are, you won't keep anything there very long. Okay. Hopefully this is making some sense. If you feel like you can pinpoint the thing that you don't understand verbally, feel free to interrupt me and say what that is. But okay, so one thing that's interesting, if you look at what the grid, I don't know if you've processed what the grid is. It's a square that shows the 0 page, right? And the little indicators here are things that say, like, if there's an I here, it means integer basic uses this spot. So be careful with this spot if you're doing something in integer basic. AppleSoft uses this spot. Be careful with that spot if you're using AppleSoft. And so here's the stuff we have. The 3s are used by DOS 3.3. M is used by the monitor. There's some other codes here, but one thing that's of interest here in these first 2 rows is that there are no I's. Well, there's one I. I don't know what that is. I should have looked that up, but there are effectively no I's, and there are a whole lot of A's. And so one thing that means is that this becomes difficult to use in conjunction with AppleSoft, because AppleSoft uses all that space. So SWEET16 will clobber it all. So that's another reason, possibly, why it hasn't been all that heavily used. Okay, so I guess what I wanted to do is kind of walk through that little bit of code just to sort of see what it's doing. Okay, so the first thing it does is it's loading indirect register N, so register 1. Register 1 is the source address. This is a moving operation, right? So it's taking something from the thing register 1 points to, and it's moving into the thing register 2 points to. And I think R3 must be the length. The register 3 is the length of the copy you're doing. Okay, so the first instruction is for1, load register 1. And so this is in Waz's article. It sort of technically goes through what it says. You load the low order of the accumulator, which is register 0, and then the branch conditions are set based on whether it was a 0, whether it was a -1, that kind of thing. Carry is cleared, and after the transfer, this is the thing I think that I kind of wanted to point to. After you run this, the register increases by 1. So it's consuming memory as you go through it. It's not just loading it; it's also incrementing the pointer, which means that what this is doing is load store, load store, load store. But internally, it's saying load, add 1, store, add 1, load, add 1, store, add 1. So it'll just keep spinning through the address space until you get to the end, and it can do that in 1 byte, right? For 1 says, load the thing at register 1, and then increment register 1. Okay. And then, so then the store is basically doing what you'd expect in the opposite way. So it's storing it, register gets incremented by 1. DCR is a decrement. So this will just, reduce the count R3, which is our length. It'll decrease R3 until it hits 0, at which point the BNZ will fall through. So if it's not 0, it'll go back up and load store, load store, load store. And if it is 0, it'll fall back to the return to 6502 mode. So it's whatever, straightforward and transparent. If you were, the point is supposed to be that if you were to actually try to do that in 6502 code, it would take many more bytes. I don't know how many bytes that is, but it's not many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Well, 6 bytes plus 3 in advance to get into the mode, and then whatever you had in advance to set these to the origin and the origin and destination and length. So, whatever, 10, 12, I don't know. Okay, sorry, and now we get to watch all the animations again. All right. So that's basically how it works. That's probably enough. That's probably as much as you need to know about what it does, so that if you wanted to do something like this, you can go look it up, right? I mean, it exists now. The other thing I kind of wanted to do a little bit, at least, was to look at the actual interpreter that Woz wrote. So this is the code that was published in Byte, and there's maybe just a couple of things I'll mention about it. I didn't get very far in this part, but I thought it was kind of, it shows a couple of interesting tricks that if you might know, but you might not know. Okay, so the first thing it does at the entry point. So this is assembled at 800. I forget where it is. It's supposed to be in ROM. One thing that's interesting, many of you will have this book, I think, as of recently. This is Randy Hyde's Datamos book using 6502 assembly language, and it actually has a little subtitle with an introduction to SWEET16 on it. So that's kind of cool. I hadn't realized that until recently, that it was in here. And so I'm opening this up just so I can tell you what the address is supposed to be, but I think it's doesn't actually matter. I wish I had it in front of me, but it's like F6, 5B or something like that. It's somewhere in the ROM, right? It'll show up at some point. Oh, I know where it is. Stop. F689. Okay. Anyway, as promised, it doesn't matter. Okay. But anyway, so the normal thing you would do is call it at the entry point, the 800 entry point, or wherever it is, the thing I just read, and that will save all the 6502 status stuff, and then start executing the SWEET16 things. If you don't need to preserve your 6502 registers, then you can skip ahead to 803. So that'll save you a little bit of time because you won't be saving the registers and then restoring them later. So if you want to have it run like 9 times slower instead of 10 or whatever. Okay, so the other thing is a trick. I don't think this came up in the relocatable code talk, although it might have. It might have, and it fits in there. But what this is doing is the first thing it does is pulls off the stack the accumulator, stores it somewhere, pulls off the stack the accumulator and stores it somewhere. And what this has done is basically said, it's looking at where it should return when it gets an RTS. I don't know if this is a trick. Maybe this is a trick everybody learns immediately. But I always thought it was like mildly magic. So if you do a JSR to somewhere, it stashes on the stack the address of the next place it's going to return to. So when it hits RTS, all it does is pull things off the stack and goes there. What this is doing is basically saying, I'm not going to wait for the RTS, I just want to see who called me, so I know where to go back to. Anyway, so, actually, here's the reason that you want to do that. The code is it's just, we're just reading the memory and executing the code in order, right? And so when we JSR to this, now we want to go back into that same place and start reading the opcodes for the SWEET16 opcodes. So we need to know where to start reading. So that's what this is doing. R15 is the program counter. So it's taking the return address and putting it in the program counter. Okay, and then there's a little loop here which says basically interpret something and then interpret another thing. So if you can read this, it's jumping to the subroutine that's just off the end here, which I'm gonna get to. But so it's gonna call 80F, and then when it's done with that, it's gonna go call 80F again until heat death of the universe. Okay, and this is the thing that it's calling. Now, what did I want to say here? I did actually sit down and figure out how this worked, and then I wasn't sure that it was actually interesting. But it is kind of intriguing to see how you solve these problems. So the very first thing it's doing, increment R15L, that's moving. Well, okay, actually let me talk about these 3 instructions. So R15 is the program counter. That's the place that we're looking for the next opcodes. The first thing it does is it increments the low byte. So if we were looking at 801, now we're going to be looking at 802. And then if that didn't turn it into 0, then it goes down here. If it did turn it into 0, that means we need to increment the next higher byte, right? So if we were looking at 8FF and we increment it, it goes to 0, and we need to be looking at 900 now, right? So this is a cool little idiom, basically. If you need to be incrementing things like this, that is probably about as efficient as you can do it. So anyway, I thought that was kind of neat. Again, it's new to me. It's quite possible that it is ancient, news to everybody, but I thought it was kind of cool. Yeah.
I guess that's actually a good example of where SWEET16 starts saying,
Right, or hidden inside the load instruction, right? I mean, you load 1 byte says load into register 1 or whatever, and that both loads and increments. So that's still pretty slick, though, I thought. Anyway, I mean, I'm sure the chip was designed to do that specific thing, but anyway, I thought it was cool. Okay, so anyway, we're moving the program counter ahead, and then we are, let's see. Well, okay, so here we're getting the instruction from, the thing that we're pointing to now, the next instruction, the next SWEET16 instruction. We AND it with F, and what that means is that's going to tell us basically which register we're looking at. So if you look at the instructions, it's 2 digits, right? It's like 1E or something, and that's going to be operation 1 on register E. And so by ANDing it with F, we get just the E part. So we can look at that. And then by shifting it left, we double it so that we can get the reference into the 0 page. So all the registers are like bytes 0 to 20 in the 0 page. And so it's going to pull in E, and then it's going to double it to whatever that would be, doubled. EE. Not actually. But, and that'll tell you where the register is. So that's also, kind of a cool little idiomatic thing. So then it moves that to the X index, and now we can refer to 0 plus X to get to whatever the register is. And then there's some other computation here to figure out basically if we're looking at, let's see, somewhere there's going to be a, here, yeah, a branch of equal to 0 means basically we're looking at something that is doing something other than manipulating registers. It's returning, or it's doing some other thing, breaking, checking something. So if it's doing something non-register related, it goes away, wherever that is. Otherwise, it does, it does some more sort of computation to figure out how to deal with the register stuff. So, oh yeah, I think what it's doing here is there's a jump table. Let's see. Well, it's hiding here, and maybe I'll be able to pull it up later. But basically, there's a sort of lookup table that says, okay, well, if this is the address, then you're going to jump to here. Overall, this whole thing, I believe, is 400 bytes, something like that. It's quite compact. So as long as you're saving more than 400 bytes by putting this in, then it's kind of worth it. Okay. Yeah, this wasn't a 5-minute talk, now that I think about it. But anyway, okay, so I thought this was kind of interesting. I've just, I guess I lost the box, but I'm just pulling this part of the page up. This is just sort of a little comment, a little programming comment from Woz in the middle of this. He's sort of talking about this, this trick of, well, okay, so the goal is basically you've pulled in 2 bytes, an address, right, and you want to jump to that address. So one thing you could do is load the higher order byte, store it someplace, load the lower order byte, store it in, one closer, and then jump indirect to that place. Can you do that? I think I actually don't remember if there's a opcode for that. I think this was one of the ones where we were not sure, like there's a difference between whether it's available in 0 page and non-0 page. I think it's possible that you can do only one of them. I don't know. Anyway, but the point is, load the byte, put it there, load another byte, put it there, and jump indirectly to there. And he points out that actually one thing you could do, because the RTS instruction, is a jump to a place that it gets off the stack, is instead just push the stuff on the stack. So if you push these 2 addresses on the stack and then RTS, that is effectively a jump. And it saves a little bit of space. And I don't, so he's enthusiastic about this. I forget how much space we've saved, but we saved a little. And I don't entirely understand the comment here, but he says, this ironic situation is an example of what is commonly referred to as cleverness. So he's almost acknowledging that he's clever.
Ironic, he said, yes, it's a JSR.
I see. Okay, yeah, I guess right. So somehow he's getting the JSR functionality by using an RTS. Yeah. Okay, maybe that's where the irony comes in. But yeah, anyway, I don't think we doubted he was clever. But okay, and then what else is here? Oh yeah, okay. So he ends this by saying, as a final thought, the ultimate modification for those who don't, want to do this, is to actually sort of make a processor that can do this. So a low-level interpretive processor. Well, that's what I thought he said, actually. That's the way I read this. Now that I'm reading it out loud, it's not exactly the thing he said, but at any rate, he basically, this is a proof of concept that this kind of thing is useful. He found it useful for his thing. He ends with, I leave it to readers to explore further possibilities for SWEET16. And so that was November 1977, I think. This is a sort of canonical reference for this thing. And then so there were a couple of other things that have been written. So let's see. Well, yeah, maybe I'll start with, so what I'm doing, I'm looking at a PDF of this thing, of Randy Hyde's book, where he kind of goes through much of the same stuff. You can read it. It's many of the same words that are in Waz's article. Here's an example of some actual SWEET16. Basically, okay, so here's one point I'm going to make, I guess. It seems like moving memory around is the only thing anyone has ever used SWEET16 to do. So all the examples are of this sort. So here's some SWEET16 code and some enthusiasm about how much smaller that is than 6502 code. Okay, and it goes through the opcodes. And then it is left to the reader to discover its uses. Running low on places to use it. I think I have. Yeah. So there is. Where is it? Okay. So there's an introduction to SWEET16 by Dick Sedgwick. This is actually in the WASPAC. This was reprinted in the WASPAC as well. And this is basically sort of going through. This is the thing people always refer to as, like, this is what you want to do to understand Waz's article about how to use SWEET16. Though it actually turns out that Waz's article is relatively readable. Okay, so he goes through, gives some examples about like what it's going to do, and essentially it's all still moving things. It's here. What we're doing is we're moving an integer basic string from one place to another. So it goes into some discussion about how integer basic stores strings, and then you move things around. He gives a little example of basically saying, like, where do you want to move this string to? Okay, so, and then here also, essentially, yeah. Oh, actually, this is kind of an interesting point that he makes, that it's a simple enough kind of like processing system that you could conceivably teach somebody assembly language more easily with this limited thing. But okay, well, I thought he said this somewhere, but basically everybody is saying essentially, okay, I've shown you how to move memory. It's up to you to figure out what else to do with it, and I don't really know what else anyone has done with it. The one place that it has been used is in the Programmer's Aid number 1 chip. So that was something that actually worked. In the old Apple IIs, there was a couple of empty ROM slots, or ROM sockets, I guess I would say, and you could put the Programmer's Aid chip in number 1 in there. I guess there were supposed to be others. But at any rate, number 1 was as far as it went, because then the AppleSoft then filled up all the ROM spots after that. But so the basic renumbering routine does actually use SWEET16. So there's a little bit of SWEET16 code in Apple's Programmer's Aid number 1. That's this thing. Again, this is something that almost nobody has, right? Because it went away with the original Apple II. So you can load it into your RAM card. But okay, so let me actually mention this. It is possible to do SWEET16 in CA65. So CA65 is competent to actually assemble this. So you can drop into, I don't know if it's visible here, but I've got 6502, and then I call the SWEET16 interpreter, and then set the assembler to SWEET16 mode, and then write some SWEET16 stuff, and then set it back to 6502, and then return. And so it's possible to do, to actually run. Let's see. Dare I do this? Okay. It might work. It did work once. If I say build, and I say run, and I say, I know I put it in a, okay, so that's pleasing. Essentially, the problem that I have here is that it is, well, first of all, one problem is it's the wrong computer. Okay. Actually, no, that's all right. This will do. It freaked out because it didn't actually have the right ROM in place. So if I, okay, so where am I now? All right. Let me start over. Okay, so this is a 2E. Obviously, it is obvious to me, but it's probably obvious to all of you that it does not have integer basic in it. But the system master does allow for integer basic, right? So if you boot the system master, it loads in integer basic so that we could swap into it. And once we do that, then SWEET16 is available in that space. So that thing that got compiled is here, SWEET16 v3. And so I think if I do something like, okay, let me see if I can do this blind. hcolor equals 5 hplot 0 0 2 279191 return. Okay, cool. So what I just drew an orange line on the second high-res page. The reason I did that is because what this is doing is moving the second high-res page to the first high-res page. So it's starting at 4,000, ending at 6,000, headed for 2,000. And okay, so now I've drawn that line. I'm now typing HDR. Okay, so now here's our blank page, int, and now burn. Nice. What was it called? SWEET16 v3, I think. This should, if I am correct, move page 2 to page 1, and we should see the orange line appear. So the moving works, and modern tools work. So I got that working 6 minutes before I got up here. So, but actually, speaking of that time, I think I have actually run over a little bit. So that's enough. Now you know what SWEET16 is enough that you can decide if you can think of something better to do than move memory around. And with whatever time, maybe I can have a question if there is a question, or maybe I've just stunned everybody into hunger because lunch is next. Okay, everybody's mad at you now. Yes. Yeah. 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 Not that I'm aware of. I mean, that's not. I don't know exactly. I know I thought of this in the same brain space as Charles's, like, whatever 8080 emulator, but. Yeah, that's true. The Pascal interpreter is doing something similar. It's using a. Yeah, right.
So it's completely useless. Has anyone tried to implement a certain set plugin to make a?
Mm-hmm. I don't think so, but that's what I thought. That's what I was trying to. That's what I thought was suggesting there at the end of the article until I actually read it. Yeah, but and there are some efforts out to like port this to so this page that I was reading from is about porting SWEET16 to things like the Atari or like any other 6502 machine. But no, I don't know of anyone that has made a SWEET16 coprocessor. But it doesn't do very much, right? I mean, it adds and subtracts and moves things, and yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.